Um, my name is Bryan Bishop. I'm in the biology department and co-chair of environmental studies. And the next three talks, mine plus two more, we're going to look at more of what's happening with the environment in regard to the organisms out there. We know climate change is happening. We know the Earth is warming, as previous talkers have attested to. And so now the question is well, how are organisms responding? Because indeed they are. And I think I'll step down here. I'm going to talk about pollinators and how they are being affected by climate change and what might be happening with them. And first off, before I talk about pollinators, I got to talk about what they're doing. And they're pollinating. They're moving pollen from plant to plant. And why are they doing this? Well, it has to do partly with these plants. These are the flowering plants, the largest group of plants on the planet. And they have a problem. They've got to get that pollen from one individual to another individual. Well, if you haven't noticed, plants don't just get up and run over to another plant and say, hey, you want some pollen? They need something else to carry it for them. And they have opted to use animals. And in particular, a group of animals. These are the pollinators. There's three main groups. There's the birds, such as hummingbirds in our part of the world, or sunbirds in Africa. There's also bats, and then there's the insects. And you notice all of these have wings. They can fly. They can carry the pollen around with them. Well, I'm going to focus primarily on one particular group, and that's the insects. They're the largest group, and I will argue the most important group for pollinators. And within that group, we again have a number of different organisms, families, if you will, orders that are involved with this. We have up here on the top right, or left, up here, we have the beetles. The oldest group that's been pollinating plants. They actually go back into the Jurassic, predating even the flowering plants, of moving pollen around. And then we have flies down here, which are also very important movers of pollen. And then we have moths and butterflies here, both also very important. But then probably the biggest group that's really co-evolved with the flowering plants are the bees. They are basically vegetarian wasps. They have evolved to eat nothing but pollen and nectar. Unlike their ancestors, the wasps, which are carnivores, this is what they do. They have hairs all over their body to pick up the pollen, carry it around, and deposit the pollen in other places. Now, like I said, pollinators are incredibly important for carrying pollen around to allow plants to be pollinated and ultimately to reproduce, produce seeds, produce fruits in this case. Because of that, not only is it important for out there for wild plants, if you will, and for ecosystems, it's also important for our food. In fact, 1 out of every 3 bites of food comes from a plant that's been pollinated by an insect, either directly or indirectly. And in case you didn't realize it, one of those is this thing right there called chocolate or cacao. And for a lot of people, that's pretty important. Now, like I said, these are important for pollinating, for getting this pollen around to these various plants. And so you would say, well, hey, if these things are so important, we're probably trying to protect them. We're trying to make for sure that they're doing well because, hey, a lot of the stuff we like to eat depends on them. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. You could really say we've had an assault on pollinators for about the last 70 years or so for various reasons. And in fact, we call this pollinator decline. Because we're seeing globally, worldwide, a decline in pollinators. And there's various reasons for this. The first two up there the pesticides and habitat levels, now they're not really part of climate change per se, but they're still important. It's sort of a, if you will, a perfect storm of all of these coming in together. And pesticides, of course, insecticides, what do insecticides do? They kill insects. Well, what are a lot of pollinators? They're insects. So that's not good for them. But even when we try to use insecticides in a way that it doesn't actually kill the insect, we're finding that it still has effects on them. For example, in bees, they have found that low doses of insecticides, in particular a group called the nicotinoids, that it causes memory loss. And for a bee, when she leaves her nest to go out and collect pollen and nectar, and she gets exposed to these insecticides, then she forgets where home is. Where do I go back? And she ends up dying out there. And so we're finding that even at low doses, these are having effects. Habitat. We are really good at growing monocultures. We grow lots of corn, thousands and thousands of acres. Corn is not a good food source for insects. Doesn't produce the nectar. The pollen could be collected, but it's not a good food source for energy. And so for an insect, that might as well just be a desert. It might as well just be sand as far as they're concerned. And yet we've started growing crops that way and been doing that for a number of decades. CO2, now that is related to climate change. We've already been seeing, we just saw a graph of how CO2 levels have been going up. Plants respond to CO2. As you know, they take carbon dioxide in. And there's one group of plants called the C3 plants, in particular the grasses, which as you increase carbon dioxide, it helps them grow. These are grasses though. They can start now invading into areas where you had more of the other flowering plants that the pollinators like, and now then they're being replaced. Those plants are being replaced by grasses. And then lastly, we have actual climate change. And like I said, that's what I'm going to focus on here, looking at this climate change and how that is impacting pollinators, what it looks like it's doing. And so, whoops, back up here. As I said, we know that pollinators are being affected. So just two quick examples here. This is monarch numbers measured indirectly by just the size of their roosting sites down in Mexico. And as you can see, over time, even though there's been ups and downs in the population, they've actually been steadily declining. The trend is down. Why is that happening? Well, we don't really know for sure why it's happening. There's a lot of things, could be those previous things I was just mentioning, and maybe other reasons that we don't know about or fully understand. So monarchs are declining. But probably the thing that really got us interested in this, really got us saying, whoa, this isn't good, is the decline of honeybees. Now honeybees in North America, they're actually European honeybees, as the name implies. They're European. They're not native to here. We've brought them over from Europe, and they've now spread all over the place. We can manage them. They're our only domesticated well, take that back, silk moths too, but they're our domesticated insect that we can travel, carry around, put on places, etc. They are vital for pollination. A lot of those crops we just saw, including many others, are pollinated by insects, by honeybees. And in fact, in California, every year, virtually every single producer of honey beehives, that's a commercial producer, virtually every single hive travels to California to pollinate the almond industry. Literally every single hive. And so it's vital. It's a billion-dollar industry. Well, when they start to decline, people notice. They say, whoa, something's going on here. Well, as you can see, in the 1950s was their peak. Now, what happened in the 1950s? Well, that was post-World War II, and that started what we are living in now called the synthetic pesticide era. We started using insecticides like crazy, and we see a decline in honeybees. And then in the 1980s, right here, I think our pointer's dying, Two mites came in, and they are parasites on the bees, and those were just another blow to them, and they started declining even more. And then just a few years ago, we had a phenomenon that we started noticing called colony collapse disorder, CCD. And in that case, what happens is during the winter, for still reasons we do not understand, hives of honeybees, the bees just disappear. They leave, and they do it in the middle of winter. That's not a good time for bees to be out. And we don't know where they go. They just disappear, literally. And it's not uncommon for apiary, a place of people who keep bees, to lose as much as 50 to 80% of their hives. That's a huge loss. And so you can see these numbers have been decreasing here, but we're needing more and more bees for pollination. So this has made people to start looking at other insects, in particular our other bees, because this is only one bee, and so now we're starting to look at other bees. Prior to this, we really didn't even study them. Everybody spent their time studying honeybees, because that was our important one. And so, as you can see, the vanishing bee, that's become the mantra. The bees are disappearing, the bees are disappearing. But when you hear that, that is only this one species, Apis mellifera. That's the only bee they're talking about as far as this goes. But there are other bees out there. And the question is, are they disappearing? And indeed, unfortunately, it looks like problems are happening there too. These are just a couple of, or 4 examples, I guess, of bees just right here. Actually, these pictures were all taken just up here at the Science Center in the native plantings up there. These are all local bees, native bees. Most bees are solitary. Unlike, say, honeybees, these are solitary bees. And they go about collecting their collecting their nectar and pollen and bringing that back to their offspring. Now here's the thing, I was just mentioning one bee, the honeybee, but yet there are over 19,000 species of bees that we know of. And that's more than all those mammals and all those birds combined, all of them, in over 19,000 species of bees. And so they range from little bees to big bees. These are bees collected last summer here in Clay County, and some right here on this campus. Just an example. And you can see they range from these smaller ones that are just a few millimeters big to bumblebees that are this big, and all sorts of other bees in between. And so why do this? Why collect these? Because we don't know what's here. These haven't been studied because everybody was studying honeybees. And so we don't even know what's happening now. We do know the climate is changing. How is it going to affect them? Well, we got to get a baseline. We got to know what's here now to know what it's like 10 years from now even. Well, what we do know, I've said the climate is changing. And one of the things is that plants are responding differently. Now this is a hardiness zone for the U.S. in 1990, and if you're a gardener and you plant stuff, you know what these are about. This just shows where you can plant different plants. And as you can see, in 2006, we had to update this. Basically, all these zones shifted north because of increased temperatures. So different plants are now able to live in these new zones. Well, that means there's different plants for also the pollinators. The plants are changing. There's new plants coming into these areas. And indeed, we also see the same thing for some of the pollinators. The same applies for, in this case, hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, this is the historic that we have records for, and you can see that the dates for moving higher latitudes have basically gotten earlier. The hummingbirds are responding to this change also. And we can suspect probably that the insects are responding the same way. Now, phenology, that's basically a fancy way of saying is, when does something happen? When is the first bud burst? When does the first tulip come up? And so people record that data to know what's the average, when do things happen first. And so we're keeping track of the flowers and the insects in this case. But what we're concerned about is if the flowers are getting earlier, are the insects also getting earlier? We don't know. Are the insects keeping track with the flowering plants? And if they're not, then we've got problems for both the flowering plants and for the insects. A study that just came out, is that the 10-minute mark? I guess. A study that just came out was recently looked at 4 bee species, and the red lines here are showing the last since the 70s. This is the longer trend line here. This is temperature, so you can see temperature is definitely getting warmer, and the bees are emerging earlier. They're appearing on the scene earlier and earlier, so we know that they're responding, that they are responding to the change in climate. But again, this was only 4 species. Last year we collected 25 genera, or 25 species actually it was. And so this is just 4 species, and that was 25 just for our area. There's 4,000 species in North America. So what's happening with the rest of them? So question is, well, what can we do? What can I do about this? Can I do anything? Well, the climate part's tricky. I mean, we've heard a number of speakers talking about things we can try to do and stuff, but the CO2 is there. It's going up, 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 and things aren't going to slow down anytime soon. But there's other things we can do for the immediate short term, basically to help these insects and other animals to adapt and survive for this. One thing we can do is put out nesting boxes. And these aren't for honeybees, these are for our local bees, our native bees. These are solitary bees, and all it takes is putting out things as simple as putting out some bamboo, put it in a container, and those provide hollow spaces for them to nest in. You can also make your own boxes. Plans are on the internet. You can just go on the internet and look. Here's one. You just take 4x4 and drill holes in it. You can put various size holes. You get different types of bees coming in and nesting in it. Now, some people go, wait, they're bees. Bees sting you. Well, that's true when they're defending a big resource like honey. These don't make honey. And in fact, they're very friendly bees. You can pick them up and hold them. They'll nuzzle with you. They're cute and everything. This one was my first. This is a blue orchid bee, the first one I got from my colony last year. And so they're not aggressive at all. Also, they nest in the ground. Other types of bees will nest in the ground, so you don't want to go disturbing this type of habitat. Let it stay there. The other thing you can do is pollinator gardens. And so this is out at Long Lake, and we've converted that into CRP and pollinator habitat. You can do that in your backyard, such as I did. The thing is to have a variety of plants, not just one type of plant. They can serve both for the bees as well as for the larval stages of insects. This is here. This is just right outside the front here. So maybe you don't like that sort of unorganized look, but you like the nice, neat lines and stuff. Well, as long as you're using the appropriate plants, you can still attract pollinators to it and provide a resource for them. What you don't want to plant, though, are monocultures and what I call sort of the showy plants. If you want a few of them, fine, but if you have a lot of these, the pollinators don't use these. They don't provide anything for them. Now, petunias are nice and pretty, do service one pollinator, hawk moss, but that's it. Bees, other pollinators, they don't use these. So even though we like them because they look good, really they don't do much out there in the wild. And then the other thing to really, really avoid is the mutant plants. And these are plants where we've taken the stamens here and we've just switched a gene and turned those stamens into petals. We've just lost all the pollen. That thing's sterile. So plant good plants, those that have lots of pollen, lots of nectar. Avoid the bad plants. Thank you. Is there any question while Joe's coming up? Okay, so the question was, will the pollinator garden attract any kind of bees or? Oh yeah, like hawk moths, you said? Is that what you said? Oh, yeah, but bees are not interested in you. Bees do not want to be near you, and they're not going to sting you. The stuff that we always equate with stinging us in the fall are not bees. We call them bees. They're yellow jackets. Yellow jackets will come after you. They'll come after your sandwich. They'll come after you. Bees do not want to be near you, so they're safe. Thank you.